It's all right. We're safe now.
What would you do if a creature nearly 10 feet tall stood silently in the woods, watching you? Not with rage, not with fear, but with something deeper. Something like recognition. No roars, no escape. Just eyes that see more than we understand. The truth? Bigfoot isn't just legend. They have boundaries, rituals, and memory. And one reclusive man in the Hoh Rainforest became something no camera could ever capture. Trusted. This is the real account of Reed Halverson, a former ranger who vanished into the forest after the death of his brother, only to be found decades later, leaving behind a journal that never sought fame, only understanding. Watch to discover why Bigfoot leaves symbols etched in bark, not scratches. How a simple hand touch is a sacred bond, not curiosity, and why not everyone deserves proof. Reed once risked his life to save a drowning young Bigfoot. In return, the mother let him stitch a bullet wound inside her territory. Meanwhile, a hunter chasing fame was left with shaking hands and a steel cage buried deep in the mud. If you believe truth must always be exposed, this story may change your mind. Because some secrets, once revealed, can never go back to being sacred. The sky had been folding into itself for hours. That kind of cold, colorless dusk that settles in like a heavy breath before a storm. Trees pressed tight together on both sides of the Hoh River, their moss-slicked limbs dripping like tired hands. Rain fell straight and hard, stitching through the mist like silver thread. The water was louder than it should have been, wide, angry, rising fast. Reed Halverson stood on the bluff, boots sinking into wet pine needles, watching the river muscle its way past the boulders below. His breath left him in short clouds. He knew that bend, knew the way it curled sharp and violent, where the current carved its own rules. It was where his brother Caleb had gone under in '73. 1 minute there, the next. A scream swallowed by snowmelt. Now something broke the surface again. It wasn't sound he heard. It was motion. A black blur whipped into the churn, then gone. Then an arm, small, fur-matted, reaching, clawing toward the gray sky like it had forgotten how to pray. Reed didn't think. The rain had soaked through his wool coat anyway. He tossed the pack, peeled the sweater over his head. His knees bent low, and then he dropped, straight into the river. The cold hit like a fist to the ribs. The weight of it, not just water, but the pull. The river wasn't just moving, it was trying to take. He kicked hard, boots dragging him under, then breaking surface again as he caught a glimpse of the shape thrashing. Arms too short to fight the current, head half submerged. He closed the space fast, reached, missed. A swirl of foam dragged the creature under. No, not now. Reed dove. His hand scraped something soft, warm beneath the water, and his arms wrapped around it, twisting to the surface. They burst up together, Reed gasping, the creature coughing, choking, trembling in his arms. It was heavier than it looked. The fur soaked through, slick with river silt, made it hard to hold, like wrestling a half-drowned dog. But it clung to him now, instinct more than trust. Claws dug into his chest. Not deep, but enough to know it wanted to live. The river wasn't letting go. A log, broad, moss-coated, struck him at the thigh. He buckled, cursed through clenched teeth, then grabbed for it, letting the current shove them toward it. His ribs throbbed. Old scar, same side, same river, different life. He found footing near the trunk, just enough. With one arm wrapped around the thing's torso, he looped his belt around the log, anchoring them both like a tourniquet holding memory in place. The creature shook against him, breath shallow, eyes barely open, yellow beneath soaked lashes. "You're all right," Reed whispered. "You're all right." But he wasn't talking to it. It took everything to drag them to the gravel bar. His boots squelched in black silt as he heaved the small body up, away from the water's edge. The thing collapsed on its side, hair matted, mud crusted to its back like river clay. He pulled the folded wool blanket from the satchel he'd tied to the tree above, wrapped the creature tight, like Caleb that day. Except this time, the arms didn't go limp. They twitched. The breath still came. Reed fell to his knees, opened the tin flask he kept for heat, poured warm water into the old metal cup. No fire, too wet, too soon. He poured the water onto the cloth instead, rubbing slow circles on the creature's limbs, focusing on the feet, the hands. Small, black-skinned palms under all that fur. Fingers tipped with thick, curved nails, but not sharp. More like worn tools, shaped by stone and earth. It blinked once, then again. Rain slowed to a hush, just mist now. From across the river there was a sound. Not a bird, not a coyote. Something high and narrow. A whistle almost, but not from lips. Two tones, one short, one long. Reed turned his head sharply toward the tree line opposite. Nothing there, just trees. The sound didn't come again. Only that faint hush of water and wind through branches. The thing stirred in the blanket, its breath steadier, less labored. He didn't speak. He didn't know what name would fit, and somehow that felt like it mattered. There, by the edge of the gravel bar, a trail of crushed ferns pointed downhill, away from the main path, bent just so. A swath, like something large had passed through, but careful not to leave a print. Not broken, just swept. Reed's hands lingered on the creature's arm. He felt the pulse now, faint but there, underneath the matted fur. He remembered Caleb's hand, how small it had felt in his palm even at 10 years old. How cold it had gone, how the water never gave it back. This one had lived. The clouds shifted. A crack of gray opened just long enough to spill a thread of light across the soaked rocks. Reed sat there a long time, one hand on the small chest rising and falling beneath the wool. He didn't speak, didn't name it, didn't explain what it was, not even to himself. The moment didn't need explaining, it just needed holding. And from somewhere deep in the trees, far enough to feel like memory, came another low exhale. Not breath, a huff. Short, grounded, present. Not a threat, just a witness. At dawn, the gravel bar looked different. The flood line had crept higher overnight, leaving silt and broken reeds wrapped around every stone like river scars. The trail he'd taken to reach the bend had shifted slightly, a subtle sweep of brush, a pattern too consistent to be chance, a message not meant for eyes, but for knowing. Reed stood quietly beside the remains of a dead log and watched the trees. He could feel it. Someone else had come back to check, not closer, not visible, just there, and that was enough. For now, he turned back toward the bluff, lifting the creature, heavier now with rest, and wrapped the blanket tighter. The weight of it pulled at his shoulder, but it didn't feel like burden. It felt like a second chance. Somewhere behind him, the wind picked up, the smell of damp cedar, the hush of something large moving uphill but not too far. Not away, just far enough. And underfoot, through the leaves and needles, he noticed it again, that faint, angled line of crushed fern, bent backward this time, as if something had passed through in silence, then returned. Not everything leaves tracks, but some things leave memory, and memory, if you listen, can whisper back. The morning mist hung low like breath held too long. Everything was soaked. The cabin sat quiet, tucked into the ribs of the forest, its roof draped in moss, its steps slick with old rain and sap. The boards beneath the porch creaked softly when Reed stepped out, boots heavy with damp, breath fogging in the chill. No sun, just a gray sheen over the canopy, and that smell, deep pine, cold bark, earth still steaming from last night's storm. His back ached from sleep. The kind of sleep you don't realize you needed until you wake to silence and know you're still alive. Inside, the fire had gone out. but the small body wrapped in wool had stirred twice before dawn. Just enough to remind him it wasn't a dream. The gravel path beyond the porch didn't carry prints. It rarely did. But this morning, something else had shifted. At the edge of the clearing, where the ferns grew thick and heavy, there was a change in how they lay. A subtle lean. A clean swath pushed in one direction, angled deliberately toward the woods. Not broken, not snapped, just swept, like a warning painted in green. Don't cross. Reed stared at it, unmoving. No rings, no sticks, no patterns. But it meant something. It had to. The way it sliced through the brush wasn't natural. Not wind, not deer. It was too quiet last night for it to be accidental. He turned back and stepped inside. The air in the cabin was still damp, but warmer. The blanket lay bunched near the wood stove, and there, curled in the hollow of a wool coat, was the thing. Small still, breathing soft. Its fur dry now mostly. Chest rising and falling with shallow rhythm. Like sleep had settled in for real this time. He crouched low. Just watched. No names, no sudden moves. The creature's face was part shadow, part child, part something not meant to be seen by electric light. Its limbs were tucked tight, the way dogs sleep when they're not quite sure they're safe yet. Reed didn't reach out. He just sat there, back against the log wall, knees bent, hands on his thighs. Listening. The roof ticked. Somewhere outside, a drop hit tin. The wind carried faint smells, wet bark, soil, the sharp trace of cedar sap. But there was another note beneath it all. Faint, unmistakable. That same resinous hint of tree pitch stirred recently by warm hands. He'd spent years in these woods. He knew what bark smelled like when a hand had passed over it. Late morning, he placed a bowl of warm water on the porch step. Tin, scuffed from years. Next to it, a square of cloth, clean, no ceremony, no words. He walked back inside, but left the door cracked just enough for breath and breeze. He didn't watch, just waited. A few hours passed. Rain returned, soft and steady, then faded again. By late afternoon, he noticed the smell had changed. Fresh spruce, but subtle. As if someone had walked past the cabin not long ago, close, not right up to it, but near enough to brush the outer trees, to leave scent behind. Inside, the creature shifted once more, rolled slightly onto its side, a slow blink from one amber eye. No cry, no panic, just presence. Reed crouched again, closer now, watching how its chest moved. Still slow, but steady. He didn't speak to it. Not yet. He didn't want his voice to be the first thing it learned to fear. That night, the rain started again. He sat with the oil lamp low, its glass smudged, the wick flickering in a rhythm too close to memory. The wind knocked something against the porch once, then silence. Then, from the edge of the trees, a sound. Not footsteps, not animals, just a short huff, low and firm. Not loud, not angry, just known. As if to say, I'm here. Reed didn't move. He didn't go to the window, he just listened. Then silence again. He opened the drawer beside his bed, took out the old notebook, the one with thick brown paper and a pencil worn down to the metal. He wrote slowly. No names, no explanations. Just what he saw. The fern, angled across the trail. The scent of sap too fresh to be weather. The sound, soft and short, from the trees. A language of presence, of watching, of being seen. The fire burned low. The creature hadn't stirred again. But Reed didn't sleep. He sat on the floorboards, back to the wall, legs out, notebook in his lap. He knew the rhythm of waiting. Had spent years with no one to wait for. This was different. In the early hours, when the world turned blackest before dawn, he stepped outside. Just past the edge of the porch, where the trees started to lean, he saw the fern again. The same trail, unmoved, unbroken, still pointing inward, not inviting, not threatening, just there. And above it, carved high into a tree trunk, a mark. Not fresh, not old, not clawed, just scraped. 3 lines, uneven in their curve, as if something had tested the bark once, then moved on. Not a message, not a claim, just a visit. He ran his fingers over the grooves. The wood felt smooth, but cool, as if it remembered the hand that had passed. Back inside, the creature breathed slow, still asleep. Outside, the trees shifted just once in the wind, and somewhere beyond the clearing, another breath. Deeper this time. Not alone, not yet welcome, but watching. Always watching. The rain hadn't stopped, not fully. It just thinned, softened, retreated into mist. The kind that clings to your sleeves and lashes and settles into the folds of your coat like it belongs there. It was the 3rd evening since the river. Reed had counted them not by calendar, but by the number of times the creature stirred in sleep, by the changes in the air outside his cabin, by the scent shifts in the bark and the hush that always followed. Something about the hush told him it was coming. Something not just from memory, but from motion. Something new. The boy, he still thought of it as a boy, even though he knew better, was healing. Breathing deep now, shifting his weight slowly, cautiously, watching Reed without flinching. It didn't eat much, only what was warm, what was placed and stepped away from. Trust was forming not through words, not through any shared understanding, but through the consistency of distance and care. No sudden moves, no expectations, just presence. And now, outside, the air held something else. He felt it before he saw it. That kind of pressure in the chest like a barometric drop. That primal part of the brain that senses when the forest goes quiet, not because it's empty, but because something larger has entered it. Something that silences birds. Something that splits the hush like a knife sliding through bark. Reed stood at the edge of the porch, boots just touching the top step. The trees on the far side of the clearing were darker than usual. Not with shadow, but with density. The rain gathered on every branch but didn't fall. The ferns lay flat in a line from the western trail, but a new shape had brushed past them. Not wide like before. Tall, narrow, forceful. Leaves snapped instead of swept. Then the sound came. Not a call, not a footstep. A low break in the brush, sudden and sharp. Then a shape, barely there in the fog. Massive shoulders swaying like a slow tide. Arms too long. A body hunched forward as if built to climb through stone. The figure didn't walk into the clearing. It pushed through it, dragging vines from its shoulders, branches slapping back in its wake. Reed didn't move. He didn't dare. The thing stepped through the haze and stopped at the edge of the brush line, just far enough that the trees still claimed its silhouette. But its eyes caught light, brief, amber, watching. It huffed once, short, possessive, then swung its head low and snapped a thick branch clean in 2 with one arm. Not a warning, a message. And then another shape. From the opposite side, quieter this time, smoother, smaller but sure. She emerged like smoke, not fully visible, not needing to be. The shape was leaner, slower, but her presence wrapped the clearing in calm. She didn't charge, didn't scream. She whistled. 2 notes, short, then long, sharp enough to cut through fog. The male didn't answer. He shifted weight instead. 1 foot forward, body flexed. No roar, no bluff, just momentum. Reed's muscles locked. Every part of him screamed to act, to step between them, to stop something before it started. But he didn't move, didn't speak. Only lowered his head slightly. Both hands open, resting on his thighs. The female didn't flinch. Her shoulders rose once with a breath, then settled. She answered again, same whistle. soft now. The kind meant for calming a child or reminding someone who they are. Then she held. Behind her, movement. Reed's heart jumped. The boy. The same small figure now stepping forward, wobbling but upright. Not fast, just deliberate. Blanket still around his shoulders like a second skin. His eyes locked on the male first, then flicked to Reed, then back again. He didn't cry out, didn't hide. He just stepped forward, one breath at a time, until he stood between the cabin and the trees, between the mother and the male, between the hush and the rising wind. The male growled, low inside his chest. Shoulders swelled. The boy huffed, twice. Small, but loud enough. A sound not of defiance, but of warning. His body turned, placing his back to the man, his chest to the male. Reed swallowed. Everything stopped, even the wind. The male took one more step. The boy planted his feet. Behind him, the mother huffed long and deep. Not aggressive, final. The male paused, then turned his head slightly, just enough to mark her presence. Another half step back. Not retreat, but reconsideration. Then the air changed. The storm, still distant, cracked like bone over the trees. A pressure drop hit Reed's chest. Thunder rolled low across the valley like the voice of the river rising again. The male backed away slowly, not fearful, but no longer pressing. He turned, melted back into the trees. She didn't follow him. She stepped forward, slowly, past the line of shadow. Not all the way, just enough to be seen. Her hand brushed the boy's back, light, like moss. Reed didn't move. She looked at him. Not long, but long enough. Then she turned back, guiding the boy behind her into the trees, leaving only damp footprints in moss and one broken vine hanging low where the male had passed. The porch creaked beneath Reed's boot as he stepped back. Somewhere deep in the forest, a gunshot cracked the silence wide open. The rain had turned mean again. Not the misting kind that sits low and gentle, but the kind that came down angry. Straight lines, cold needles, cutting sideways through the trees like it had something to say. Reed stood at the edge of the porch, hands low at his sides, body still. The echo of the gunshot hadn't fully died out, but it wasn't just the sound that stuck in his chest. It was the silence that followed it, the kind that tasted like warning. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He stepped off the porch with the slow, steady gait of a man who knew that speed could cost everything. The gravel squelched beneath his boots. The air had that copper smell to it. Not quite blood, not quite soil, something that didn't belong to rain. His steps curved out wide, looping through the brush like a deer skirting open ground. No flashlight, no voice. Just rain and instinct and an ache in his ribs that hadn't gone away since the river. When he saw her, he stopped moving. She was down on one knee beneath the alder grove. Right shoulder slumped, breath labored. Her fur clung to her in long, wet strips, and the muscle beneath it twitched with every rise and fall. Blood soaked through the matted hair around her shoulder. Not bright red, but dark. Thicker, older somehow. Not the wound of a clean shot. This had been done close. Deliberate. She didn't turn to him. She knew he was there. He could feel the weight of her pain like smoke in the trees. Reed crouched low, eyes soft, arms down at his sides. No eye contact. No sudden noise. He didn't speak. Not yet. He moved in a wide arc, slow and constant, never stepping into her line. Just circling toward her, like water finds the low ground. She let him. That was something. When he was within a dozen feet, he stopped again, dropped his bag to the wet ground with both hands visible. From inside, he pulled a clean rag, folded tight, wrapped in wax paper. The bottle of old iodine was tucked deep in the corner pocket. He unscrewed the lid with a click that felt too loud and set it down beside the cloth. Still, she didn't move. Then came the breath. A low huff, not sharp, not angry, but heavy with warning. He nodded, stepped in. She allowed him just close enough to see the wound. Clean entry near the back of the shoulder. burned edges. No exit. It hadn't gone all the way through, but it had lodged deep. Blood had clotted along her side, soaked into the bark beneath where she knelt. She swayed once. Reed's hand hovered, then dropped again. No touching. He dipped the cloth into the warm water he'd brought in the old tin flask. It steamed, barely, against the cold. He wrung it out with slow fingers, then moved closer. She didn't flinch when he touched her. She was burning up. He worked in silence, cleaning around the wound without probing. Just clearing the blood, easing the stick of fur from flesh. Her breathing hitched once when the iodine touched skin, but she didn't make a sound. Not even a growl. That, more than anything, told him how bad it was. Behind him, leaves shifted. Reed's head turned fast, body tense. But it was only the boy, small, soaked, eyes wide and unmoving. He stood just beyond the clearing, halfway behind the moss trunk of a broken cedar, watching. Then something happened Reed didn't expect. The boy stepped forward. Not fast, not careless. He crossed the clearing in a direct line, each step slow, measured as if walking through memory. When he reached Reed, he didn't stop. He crouched low beside him, placed his small, dirt-streaked hand on the back of Reed's wrist, and then slid that hand forward, palm up, until it rested gently on his mother's arm. She looked at him then. For the first time since Reed arrived, she turned her head fully, and the boy did something Reed had never seen from them before. He leaned in and pressed his forehead to the back of Reed's hand. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't instinct. It was a gesture. Like something passed down without words, a way of saying what language couldn't carry. Reed froze, then slowly, gently, returned the contact, his other hand resting near the boy's shoulder, not touching, just present. A beat passed, then another, then the mother exhaled. Not a huff, not a call, just release. And for the first time, Reed felt her weight lean ever so slightly into his care. He finished cleaning the wound, wrapping the shoulder with a strip of dry cloth. No knots, just a wrap, a way of holding pressure, not claiming ownership. When he stepped back, she stayed upright, but he could see the tremble in her chest, the way her weight shifted to one side. It wasn't over yet. He stood, motion slow, knees stiff from the crouch. His back ached from the cold. His palms were streaked with old blood. The rain washed none of it away. Without a word, he stepped away from them both. At the tree line, he stopped, looked down. The mud was deep with tracks, the mother's, the boy's, and others. He bent down, brushed a layer of leaves aside. Boot prints, deep, and heading west, away from the clearing, toward the low rise of the ridgeline. A shallow rut in the mud led out from there too, longer than a man's arm. Something had been dragged, something heavy, something that left the earth pulled and gasping. Reed followed it to the base of the hill, no more than 20 yards from where the woman bled. And there, half sunken in the muck, a spent shell casing, .308. Not clean, not weathered, fresh. He picked it up with 2 fingers and turned it slowly, not from a warning shot, not from fear. This was aimed. The scar on his side, his own from decades before, tightened in the cold. He straightened. Somewhere behind him, a branch creaked. The boy had followed. No words passed between them, just the rain and the steady breath of the woman who had survived, not because she had to, but because someone made a choice. Reed stared back at the ridgeline. He'd seen enough traps in his life to know the difference between accident and bait. And this had been planned. His hand tightened around the casing. He didn't pocket it. He didn't leave it. He placed it gently in the center of the trail, upright in the mud, like a candle left at a grave. Then he turned and walked back into the woods, the boy following close behind, and the woman, his mother, watching still, wounded but unbroken. And somewhere, not far, the trees held their breath again. The trees were quieter up here, heavier somehow, like they'd leaned in to listen. Rain still clung to the undergrowth, pooling in the folds of dead leaves and the cracks in stone. But it didn't fall from the sky anymore. It just hovered in the air, waiting. Reed moved through the forest with the caution of someone who knew he was being watched. Not by eyes in the treetops, but by the land itself. The earth felt wound up, tight beneath his boots, waterlogged, noisy in all the wrong places. It had rained too long for the ground to take any more. And somewhere just beyond this ridge was a man who thought none of that mattered. Deacon Cray. Reed spotted the canvas first. Dark brown tarp stretched crooked between two black pine trunks. It wasn't a camp built to last. It was built to vanish. Beneath it, a frame of branches lashed in place with yellow paracord, half covered in brush for camouflage. But what stood out wasn't the shelter. It was what hung beneath it. A hook line, 3 of them, heavy steel S-hooks dangling from a crossbar, swaying slightly with the wind. On one, a fresh cut of venison. On another, something that looked too thick for deer, pale, salted, skinned halfway and left exposed. The smell hit next. Salt and blood and rusted metal. The traps were lined up to the left, like tools on a belt. Reed counted 4 snares, all wire-based, anchored to trees with cinder blocks. Not the kind for rabbits. These were made for weight. One of them had dark hair stuck in the coil. Coarse. Longer than any black bear Reed had ever seen up close. His stomach turned. He circled the camp without stepping inside it. Everything about it was wrong. Too close to the trail. Too calculated. He saw a folded steel cage, collapsed but large, its mesh stained and bent at one side. A latch rigged with fishing line. Next to it, a box of lead cartridges. Open, half empty. He picked one up. 308 again, same as the casing near the blood pool. And then the paper. Tacked to the inside of the tarp wall was a hand-drawn map. Pencil, smudged by rain. He recognized the bend in the river. The one he'd pulled the boy from. A small X marked it. Next to it, a note scribbled quick. Bait. Flow. His jaw clenched. Behind him, a twig snapped. Cold steel kissed his shoulder blade before he could turn. Didn't think you'd come all the way up here alone, Deacon said. Voice flat, like chewing gravel. Guess I gave you too much credit. Reed didn't move. You saw her, didn't you? Deacon's voice dropped lower. Big one. She bleed good? You get a look at the eyes? He stepped closer. The muzzle of the rifle pressed hard into Reed's back now. Tell me, Reed, is it true what they say about the babies? Think I got the right one? Reed stayed still. You shot her in the rain. You think that's the first one I've tracked? Deacon spat. They're not special. They bleed. They run. They hide. Same as anything else once the storm starts. This one just got careless. Reed's voice came low. You used the kid as bait. That thing ain't a kid. It's leverage. And it worked, didn't it? A laugh, cold and hollow. You dragged him out like some rescue dog, wrapped him in a blanket like it mattered. They came looking. You did exactly what I needed you to. Reed turned his head slightly. Not enough to challenge, just enough to feel the weight of Deacon's presence. You laid that trap before the rain started. Had to. You wait too long. The current shifts. Deacon circled to face him now, rifle lowered but still ready. This valley's all angles and patience. Set it right, and everything moves toward you. He pointed toward the steel cage folded under the brush. That's the end game, Reed. Proof. You know how much a specimen goes for? Not blurry footage. Not plaster casts. Real muscle and bone. Breathing. Reed's voice stayed even. You think anybody's gonna let you walk out of these woods with that? Deacon tilted his head. Who's gonna stop me? That thing? He jabbed the barrel toward the trees. You think it's got magic? You think just because it watches from the shadows it's sacred? Reed's fists tightened. Deacon smiled. You're like the rest of them. Lonely, broke, looking for something to believe in. He stepped closer. But me? I've got a plan. Then he raised the rifle again. You're gonna lead me to them. Reed didn't blink. They'll kill you. I'm counting on you to make sure they don't. The rope came next. Deacon didn't bind Reed's hands behind his back. He wasn't that careless. He looped the hemp cord around one wrist, enough to control him without making it obvious from a distance. Just enough to pull, to steer. The barrel stayed low but ready. They moved down slope, heading toward the ridge above the river. The air got heavier with every step. The moss underfoot sponged up each footfall, but the sound of their breathing filled the space between trees. Deacon whispered once, "They're watching, aren't they?" Reed didn't answer. "You think they'll let me get close? Or you think they'll wait until I step in their trap?" Still, Reed said nothing, but the forest around them began to shift. Rain gathered on leaves overhead, dripping in slow rhythm. Ferns bent under unseen weight. And somewhere far off, a soft exhale. Low, rhythmic. A huff that didn't belong to man. Deacon's fingers tightened on the rifle. Reed glanced back once. He didn't say a word. But something had changed, and the forest knew it. The river wasn't far, and the ground beneath their feet was starting to give. The path down to the river widened slowly, not by man's intention, but by nature's pressure. Roots exposed, banks collapsed, branches split where the soil had sloughed away. It hadn't stopped raining, not really. The sky was still swollen, gray, sagging close to the treetops, and the air tasted like the moment before a landslide. The earth felt slick under Reed's boots, every step a calculation, every foothold suspect. Behind him, Deacon kept his distance, but not far enough. The rope tightened now and then, just a warning tug. That rifle still hung loose in his arms, but his eyes never left the woods. Not fully, not since the breath sounds had started. At first it was just mist shifting in unnatural ways. Then a glimpse, something wide and tall just beyond the curtain of rain. A shape that didn't rustle, didn't crunch the leaves, didn't even seem to cast a sound. But it moved. It circled, and Deacon felt it. He was trying not to show it, still playing the cocky hunter with a prize ahead. But his fingers were tighter on the trigger guard now. His jaw flexed between words, and his boots, well worn and heavy, made just a little more noise than they needed to. "Keep going," he muttered behind Reed's shoulder. "If they want to talk, we'll let them. If they want to fight, I brought a translator." Reed didn't answer. His breath was shallow. He knew what was waiting ahead. Not just the bank, not just the trees. It was the rebang. The flat-rooted ridge that edged the far side of the floodplain. A place carved slowly over centuries, the river shaping it like a memory you don't get to rewrite. He'd camped there once in younger years, back when solitude was just silence, not something you had to earn. The trail leveled out and opened into that space now. A gentle slope leading to the edge of the river. The ground was spongy with runoff, rain collecting between the roots like shallow bowls. Across the rise, the trees stood in staggered silence, mossy fingers raised. And from those trees, something stepped out. The mother. She didn't run, didn't posture. She walked forward with the slow certainty of something not afraid of death. Her arm was still bound, but the wound no longer bled. Her breath came steady. Her form straightened. She stopped 10 feet from the edge of the slope, eyes locked on Reed. Then slowly, her gaze shifted past him, to the man behind him. Deacon made a noise in his throat, half scoff, half calculation. "Well, would you look at that?" He raised the rifle. Reed stiffened. Before a word could leave his mouth, a branch cracked across the slope. A second figure emerged. From the higher trail, thick-shouldered, dark fur soaked flat to his frame. The rogue male. He stood on the far side of the shallow ridge, arms long, hands loose, eyes trained not on the human figures, but on the boy. Because the boy had just stepped out too. From the trees to Reed's left, barefoot, silent, the young one walked forward until he was halfway between them all. And then, without sound, he placed himself between Deacon and the mother. Reed's heart locked up. Not out of fear, but out of knowing this was the line. This was the moment. The boy looked once at Deacon, then turned his back to him. He faced the rogue male instead, and gave a huff. Quick, repetitive, almost like breath out of rhythm. But it was deliberate. It was directed. The rogue cocked his head, took one step forward. Deacon's hand twitched on the rifle. The rope pulled taut between them. "Don't," Reed whispered. "What?" Deacon snapped, glancing sideways. "They're not here for you yet. But if you shoot now, you don't walk out of here." Deacon hesitated, but only for a breath. Then he jerked the rifle up, training the sight between the mother's eyes. Everything stopped. The boy threw both arms wide, not yelling, just standing. The mother didn't flinch. The rogue didn't charge. But the air changed. The rain thickened. From deep in the woods, barely audible, came a soft reply. Not a whistle, not a word, but a response from more than one direction. It was the two-tone signal again. High-low, short-long, echoed from different trees, like a language with no grammar, just intent. Reed recognized it. They weren't calling for help. They were saying something else. "Don't move. Hold the line. Something's coming." The wind picked up, and from the hills, a low moan rolled down through the trees. Not a cry, a warning. The kind of sound the earth makes before it gives way. Deacon tensed. "What the hell was—" And then Reed felt it under his boots, the tremor. Not big, not violent, just the kind of shift that tells you the floor beneath you has stopped being floor and started being something else. Water ran louder all of a sudden. The ground below them sagged. The slope toward the river gave a small groan, and then it moved. A full 6 feet of soil slumped forward, roots breaking, water spilling from pockets beneath the trail. Not a landslide, not yet, but enough to divide the ground between Deacon and the mother, between the boy and the man with the gun. The rifle dropped sideways. Deacon staggered. Reed turned, fast, and grabbed the rope at his wrist, pulling it just enough to twist Deacon's balance off center. He didn't take the gun. He took his shoulder, pulled him up. Away. The earth cracked behind them, and a boulder the size of a small car broke free from the ridge above and slammed into the trail, sealing the path back. Deacon's face was white now, panting. His eyes darted toward the rogue, who still hadn't moved. "I told you," Reed said, voice steady. Deacon didn't answer. He didn't have to, because from the trees above, 2 more shapes had stepped out. Taller, not younger, just watching. Deacon backed away slowly. The mother didn't follow. The boy didn't look back. And Reed stood there, knees trembling from the pull of gravity and memory, and felt the first thread of silence settle again in the trees. Not peace, but understanding. For now, and deep behind them, the river roared louder. Not from rain, but from something else. Something building. Something that still hadn't come. The storm had been working its way toward them all morning. Not loudly, not like thunder, but deep in the soil, in the pressure building between tree roots and the weight of too much water looking for a place to go. The kind of storm that didn't scream until it was already halfway done with you. Reed felt it in the arch of his feet, in the ache of his knees, in the way the trees leaned wrong. The slope ahead narrowed into a hem, a narrow cut between 2 folds of land, where the runoff met the river like a throat-swallowing rain. Too steep, too soft, too late to turn around now. They moved slow, Deacon behind him, rifle drawn but loose, eyes jittering more than his mouth. He hadn't said a word since the stone sealed the ridge. Something in him had shifted. Not guilt. Just the slow realization that the world he'd walked into didn't obey his version of gravity anymore. He was a trespasser here now, not the predator. Just another wet thing dragging its boots through mud that might not hold. The hem closed in around them. The slope on either side was like wet paper. One bad step and it would fold. Rain traced rivulets down through the ferns, across the trail, and off the edge where it disappeared into a gully clogged with debris. You could hear the river down there, working harder than usual, chewing at everything it could touch. Reed stopped, let the rope between them go slack. Deacon paused behind him. "You want to find a den?" Reed said, not turning. "This ain't the way." Deacon's voice cracked slightly. "You're trying to stall." Reed turned now, slow, one boot half sunken in mud, eyes steady. "You don't hear it, do you?" Hear what? But then it came again, that sound. Not a roar, not yet, but the growl of something distant. Low, broad, moving fast. A hum that didn't sit in the ears, but in the ribs. The sound of uphill water with nowhere left to go. Reed's voice dropped. "Get off the trail." Deacon shook his head, scoffing, but it was thin now, cracked at the edges. "You trying to run again?" "Not running, surviving." Then a crack up the hill, a branch giving way, but not from above, from beneath. Something had let go, and then the sky opened. It wasn't thunder, it was water, all of it, at once. A wall of brown, broken, furious current shot down through the gully behind them, ripping loose limbs and whole trunks from the ridge. Reed moved without thinking. He grabbed Deacon by the collar and yanked sideways, dragging both of them into the roots of a fallen fir just as the flash flood slammed through the trench they'd been standing in seconds earlier. The roar drowned everything. Mud surged past, thick and full of bone-white branches and shale chunks the size of torsos. The whole forest shook. Reed's face pressed into bark, shoulder burning from the yank, legs pinned under wet earth. Deacon was gasping beside him, eyes wide, one hand still clinging to the rope like it meant something now. When the worst passed, and the noise began to settle into that awful hiss of aftermath, Reed pulled his arms under him, lifted his chest just enough to breathe again. They didn't speak. Couldn't. Everything was soaked, splattered, shifted, but they were alive. He rolled onto his side, wincing, coughing up the taste of rot and grit. The path behind them was gone, washed clean. Only the tree they ducked under still held shape. Deacon lay flat now, rifle missing, hands empty. For a long minute, Reed just watched him, not as enemy, not even as mistake, just as man. Then he sat up, slowly, and looked up the slope, and saw them. Not just the mother this time. She was there, at the far edge, above the rise, barely more than a silhouette in the mist. But there were others now. 3, maybe 4. Motionless, eyes low. Not challenging, not hiding. One of them gave a huff, soft, directed, warning, not threat. Deacon didn't see them yet. He was still coughing, pulling his boots free from half-buried rock, trying to understand what part of the story he'd just entered. Reed stood. He didn't wave, didn't speak. He just stepped out from under the broken trunk, up onto what was left of the ledge. And then he saw something he didn't expect, a path, not made of boards or stone, but of choices. Every inch of trail ahead had been swept clear, not by flood, not by chaos, but by intention, as if someone had passed through right before the storm and carved away with footsteps too light to be human. He knew that smell again. Faint, almost gone now, funsome, crushed and lifted. A scent of movement without panic. He took it as a sign. Behind him, Deacon finally caught his breath. "You think they saved us?" he said, voice low, unsure if he was asking a question or whispering a thought. Reed didn't answer, because he didn't know. What he did know was this. The storm didn't kill them because they didn't fight it. Because in that moment, Reed had chosen to pull Deacon from the mud instead of watching him get taken. That wasn't reward. That was balance. The rain lightened. The trees swayed again, not in threat, but as if resetting themselves, shaking off the tension, reclaiming silence. And somewhere far behind them, water still moved. Not fast now, just steady, just present. But it wasn't finished. Not yet. The storm had rinsed the world clean. That's how it felt when Reed stepped out onto the porch the morning after. Like the woods had been stripped of their dust, their judgment, their noise. The roof still ticked with leftover droplets, tapping down into a tin pail half full of yesterday's rain. A low fog clung to the forest floor like breath that didn't want to rise, and the light coming through the trees wasn't gold or gray. It was just soft, like a hand laid flat against the back of your neck. Everything was quieter now, not just in sound, but in presence. The kind of quiet that stays behind after something big has passed through. Not absence. Reverence. He'd slept with his boots still on. Not out of fear. Just because something in his body didn't believe the night was done. But now the sun was somewhere above the clouds, and the cabin had held. The boy had stirred once before dawn, then drifted again, curled under the wool blanket like it knew the danger was gone. For now. And then Reed saw it. At first, it looked like nothing, just a patch of bark missing on the door frame. But as he stepped closer, he realized it wasn't accidental. It hadn't peeled or rotted. It had been removed, clean, deliberate. A hand-sized strip of outer bark gone, leaving the pale grain beneath exposed like a wound turned to light. The mark wasn't shaped. It wasn't carved. It just was. New, straight, still damp. Reed reached up, fingers hovering near it. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a warning. It was presence. The kind that said, "We saw." The kind that meant, "You mattered." He lowered his hand without touching it, not wanting to alter what had been left. Not for him to change, not this time. Back inside, the kettle hissed softly on the stovetop. He poured warm water into the tin bowl, stirred in the last of the pine ash soap. His fingers were still swollen from the cold, but steady now. He washed slow. Face, hands, the back of his neck. Each motion a ritual, not of habit, but of choice. He wrapped the belt again through the loops of his pants. Not the rope Deacon had used, but the old leather one with the split edge. He buckled it like armor, but not for battle, for remembering. Then he went out to the back of the property, to the tree, the one with the roots that curled up like knuckles. He dug there barehanded until the mud gave way to the dented metal. The folded cage. Still caked in flood silt, the netting rusted at the seams. He didn't hesitate. He buried it. Not deep, not forever, but enough. Enough to make sure it wouldn't be used again. He laid leaves and needles over it, pressed them down until the earth looked like nothing had changed. Then he stood, brushing off his palms, and turned his face toward the ridge. The scent of crushed fern lingered in the air. Not near, but not gone, like a door still cracked. Inside the cabin, the journal lay open on the table. The brown pages rippled slightly from the damp. He took the pencil and pressed it to the paper. "Not proof, Grace." He stared at it, then added, "Not evidence. Debt repaid." He stared a little longer, then tore the page clean out. He folded it once, then again, touched a match to the corner and let the paper curl into flame in the old tin ash tray beside the stove. The fire made no sound as it died. By late afternoon, the light had changed again. The fog lifted. Not high, but enough to show the edges of the trees and the line where the deer trail cut through the bramble. And then he saw it, another line of ferns, bent backward, not trampled, not torn, swept, but this time not pointing into the woods. They were turned outward, away from the cabin, toward the river. Reed stepped off the porch, slow. The soil no longer squelched underfoot, just softened. He followed the faint swath until it vanished near the stand of cedar where the forest thickened. He stood there for a while, not calling out, not waiting, just listening. There was no sound of movement, no answer, only the faintest trace of pitch on the wind. Not fresh, not thick, just enough to let him know it hadn't been a dream, just enough to remind him they had left when they chose to. Not chased, not forced, not afraid. He returned to the porch before dark and stood in the doorway. The boy hadn't stirred, still curled near the hearth, face half lit by the coals. Reed sat at the edge of the frame and leaned back, let his head rest against the doorframe. The stripped mark was right above him now. He looked up at it, exhaled slow. Not everything had to be named. Not everything had to be understood. Some things were just known, and in the stillness that followed, he caught the last breath of wind coming through the trees, carrying the scent of something alive, not calling him forward, not beckoning him back, just passing through. The cedar swayed once, and the forest held, not in silence, but in trust. Sometimes the wildest stories aren't about monsters or miracles at all. They're about the quiet choices we make when nobody is watching. Those moments when fear could turn us inward, yet we reach outward instead. Out in the hush of cedar and rain, where rivers rewrite the land and silence can feel like judgment, every heartbeat becomes a question. Will we guard our small circle of safety, or dare to share warmth with the unknown? Compassion is rarely convenient, but it is always transformational. It speaks a language older than words, older than boundaries, older than the maps we draw to divide what is ours from what is other. And when it is answered, whether by a whispered breath in the trees or a hand extended back across the dark, it dissolves the line between giving and receiving. In that exchange, we discover that mercy isn't a debt we pay. It's a current we enter. Once inside, we belong to something larger than our regrets. The forest, the storm, the fragile bridge of trust. All of it reminds us that the world is endlessly teaching one humble lesson. Survival is maintenance, but connection is meaning. Water will rise, stones will shift, years will widen every scar. Yet kindness leaves a mark deeper than flood or fire. A subtle strip of bark pulled away so light can reach the grain beneath. Long after footprints wash out and names fade, those small, deliberate gestures remain like hidden roots, steadying everything that grows above. Maybe that's the real pulse beneath every legend. Not the size of a shadow in the mist, but the size of the heart that chooses to see dignity where others see danger and to answer need with grace instead of greed. When we honor that impulse, in the woods, in our homes, in the quiet corridors of our daily lives, we help carry forward a legacy older than fear. The promise that goodness can echo farther than any scream, and that listening is its own act of courage. If this tale stirred something in you, an ember of wonder, a memory of kindness received, a thought about the bridges we might still build, I'd love to hear it. Drop your reflections in the comments below so we can keep the conversation alive beneath the tall trees of this shared space. And if you'd like to walk further down these winding paths together, consider subscribing and ringing the bell so you never miss the next whispered story from the edge of the firelight. Thank you for lending your time, your ears, and your heart. Until the next nightfall, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep listening for the quiet calls that ask us to be gentler than the world expects.